So welcome everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. So I guess everybody got some food, right? Okay, wonderful. I'm so happy to see so many students, right, that are taking a particular course with Professor Enright, I heard, which really is a Catholic Studies course as approach, right? Catholicism and literature. And then I see so many faculty members here. Monsignor Sheeran, our president, actually when I was hired at Seton Hall University, Monsignor Sheeran was the president at that time. Thank you very much, Board of Trustees, Bob Wildeman. So many, Father Jerry, I see Father Jerry there. Father Nick, thank you very much, Father Nick. I see the provost, Dr. Passerini. I see Monsignor Rodano. We have an event actually next week. Okay, Bishop Farrell is coming here directly from Rome. So thank you again, students, faculty, for coming. Special welcome to our very special guest, Father Antonio Spadaro, and all the faithful guests, that are here. Of course, Father Spadaro is going to deliver the 10th Archbishop John J. Myers annual lecture. So it's 10 years actually that we have established this lecture series in the name of John J. Myers, and it's a lecture series on law, society, and faith. As probably people here know, Archbishop Myers, he passed in 2020. He was the 5th Archbishop of Newark, and he was, of course, a friend of Catholic Studies, our program. So we had Archbishop Myers here for many years, attending the lecture. And also he was the ecclesiastical superior of Turks and Caicos from 2001 to 2016. Now, about our very, very special guest, Father Spadaro. Father Spadaro, actually, this is not the first time that Father Spadaro has been a guest of Catholic Studies. And I'm very grateful that Father Spadaro keeps coming, to Seton Hall University. I guess, Father Spadaro, we welcome you, right? That's why we come. Yeah, you come. Yes. In fact, when he visited us for the first time, it was 2014. And at 2013, actually, when Pope Francis was elected as Pope, Father Spadaro got the first interview of Pope Francis. It was a groundbreaking interview, and I remember, the emotions from students, from faculty. They all gathered around Father Spadaro. They wanted to hear, that personal scoop from Father Spadaro. And his lecture actually was, the title of the lecture was, "My Door is Always Open, Pope Francis' Vision of the Church," right? And we still talk about Pope Francis with his door wide open, right? And that culture of encounter that we, as a university and as a Catholic university, are doing in our classes, with our students, with our faculty. So that is the whole point of education, encounter, dialogue. So Father Spadaro, our door will always be open for you. So welcome again. So the topic of Father Spadaro today is literature, right? Literature and how to read the papacy, the 10 years of papacy of Pope Francis through the eyes of literature, which is very Catholic studies, actually, right? Speaking with literature, and literature always, I see it with students, when you teach literature, when you teach theology through literature, it really clicks and it really makes sense to students. So just a few words about Father Spadaro. Maybe somebody doesn't know him yet. Father Spadaro was born in 1966. He's a Jesuit priest. In 1998, he joined the community of the Jesuits bi-weekly review, the famous La Civiltà Cattolica, of which he has been the editor-in-chief since 2011. He is also a member of the board of directors of Georgetown University. He received a doctorate, STD, in sacred theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, where he taught as a visiting professor at the Faculty of Theology. Since 2011, he is a consultor of the Pontifical Council for Culture, now Dicastery for Culture and Education in the Vatican. He is also ordinary member of the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts and Letters of the Virtuosi of the Pantheon. He has published about 30 volumes, focusing on theology, cyber theology, but also always a theology in connection, a theology in communication, to use Lonergan here, a theology in dialogue, in encounter with culture. He's also the author of the first interview that I already mentioned of Pope Francis, which had international circulation. He follows Pope Francis in his apostolic trips as a member of the papal entourage. Pope Francis also appointed him as a member of the synods of bishops convened by him since the beginning. So this is about Father Spadaro. Now, it's a very special year, actually, for Catholic studies, this last year and also this year, because we are 25. It's the 25th anniversary of Catholic studies at Seton Hall University. So we are celebrating this, both the Center for Catholic Studies and Program in Catholic Studies. It's 25 years that we have been at Seton Hall University. So thank you so much, Father Spadaro, for coming. And then, after the lecture of Father Spadaro, Gloria Grabois has a little video as a surprise for people, so just bear with us. Now I will invite Professor, my dear colleague and friend, Professor Dermot Quinn, who is the editor-in-chief of the Chesterton Review, because Dermot knows Father Spadaro actually a long time. So Dermot, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Inez, and thank you, everybody. Father Spadaro really needs no introduction because he's probably the second most famous Jesuit in the world, and he will be talking about the most famous Jesuit in a moment or two. Inez was wondering why he always comes back to Seton Hall, and the answer is that Inez asks him, and Inez is kind of rather hard to refuse, so he may be here for many years to come. So he needs no introduction, but I would like to say a few words of welcome on behalf of the Chesterton Institute here at Seton Hall. First of all, because he has shown wonderful hospitality and friendship to us over the years, especially as the host of our conferences in Rome in the last decade. And secondly, because he's very much interested in the work of cultural renewal, which is at the heart of what we do in the Chesterton Institute. So let me explain what I mean by that. This afternoon, we are going to hear about Bergoglio's reading list. But if the lecture were to be entitled Father Spadaro's reading list, it would not only be extensive, because he's a formidably well-read man, but it would certainly include three important people: Flannery O'Connor, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and G.K. Chesterton. Father Spadaro has translated them and written brilliantly on their importance for the modern world. What these writers have in common, among other things, is their use of language to make us see the world in new and startling ways. They are sacramental writers, understanding in the warp and woof of the world the spiritual realities contained and conveyed by material things. They are, in the deepest sense, incarnational writers. Flannery O'Connor called herself a hillbilly Thomist. Chesterton was once described as a Fleet Street phenomenologist, Fleet Street being where he worked for many years as a London journalist. To Father Spadaro, O'Connor's writing has what he calls a shock factor with at least three dimensions. The first element of shock is that she writes the way she sees the world. She has a vision, and I'm quoting Father Spadaro here, she has a vision of reality. According to her, fiction is about everything human, and we are made of dust. And if you scorn getting yourself dusty, then you shouldn't try to write fiction. As Father Spadaro points out, writing of O'Connor, but in words that could also apply to Chesterton, abstract concepts do not make stories. It is the matter and concreteness of life that gives reality to the mystery of our being in the world. There are no uninteresting things, Chesterton once wrote, only uninterested people. The second element of shock in O'Connor is precisely this mystery of our being in the world. Chesterton wrote in his great work of Christian apologetics, Orthodoxy, that the task of the philosopher is to be at once at home in the world and utterly astonished by it. The same might be said of O'Connor. As Father Spadaro writes, her realism is always oriented in the direction of mystery. Even gratuitous violence, the bizarre and the grotesque, a mixture of comedy and horror, can serve to stretch one's vision. When this happens, it is as if the author slaps the reader, messing with his perception by moving the face, angling it sideways. And Chesterton, too, was a master of messing with perceptions, of forcing us to notice the startling strangeness of the world. He does it in his novels. He does it in his Father Brown stories. He does it in his newspaper columns. The things we see every day, he said, are the things we never see at all. It is time for us, he says, to open our eyes. The third element of shock that Father Spadaro sees in O'Connor is that the topic of her fiction is the action of grace in territory held largely by the devil. O'Connor herself acknowledged that in her stories, the devil accomplishes a good deal of groundwork that seems to be necessary before grace is effected. The devil becomes, in some way, a dramatic necessity of the writer. And Chesterton has an equally vivid sense of cosmic drama, of the way in which we, all of us, enact in our lives what he calls an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. He also knew from his own life, especially his adolescent dabbling in spiritualism, of the reality of the devil in the world. So, Father Spadaro is in every way a Chestertonian, inviting us to a renewed sense of the possibility of language, to a reawakened awareness of the wonder of the world, to a more acute understanding of the operation of divine grace in our fallen but redeemed lives. And this is surely why Pope Francis has made such great use of his talents. Indeed, the Pope has written the introduction to Father Spadaro's latest book, A Divine Plot, striking a note that will resonate with those who know the sacramental writers I have mentioned this afternoon. Today, the Pope writes, a leaden echo manifests itself in the world, to use an expression of the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. I make an appeal. We now need the genius of a new language, of powerful stories and images, of writers, poets, and artists capable of shouting the gospel message to the world, of making us see Jesus. So please welcome Father Spadaro.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for being here. I'm very grateful for being invited to give this talk today, also for the anniversary of the Department of Catholic Studies. Thank you, Ines. Thank you to all of you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about the importance of literature in Pope Francis' pastoral vision and also political vision. So, since, there is the 10th anniversary of his pontificate, I think This is not a time for a balance, but it's a time for going deeper, the vision of Pope Francis. And I realized that literature is a very powerful root of his vision. So this is why I decided to go deeper, a little bit deeper than usual on this topic. I mean, literature and Pope Francis. I want to start saying that there is a very important word in Spanish, word which is very relevant for understanding his vision. This Spanish word is desborde. I don't know if there are people here who are able to understand Spanish, but this word desborde, or even the verbal form desbordar, it's very difficult to translate. She translated into English. Overflow, exactly. So it's very hard to translate in other languages, even in Italian. But usually we say overtaking, overflowing, going beyond the age, maybe. So faced with some major problems, the Pope said that, I'm quoting Querida Amazonia now, the way out is found by overflowing. La salida se encuentra por desborde. So the way out is found by overflowing. He adds that we must broaden horizons. It's not enough to regulate life. We must open it to God, whose presence is always greater, overflowing. In the interview Francis gave to me in 2013 for La Civiltà Cattolica, a few months after his election to the pontificate, he said about being a Jesuit. I'm going to quote him. The mystical aura never defines its ages. Never defines its ages. It does not complete the thought. The Jesuit must be a person of incomplete thinking, of open thinking. He was talking about the Jesuits, and he's a Jesuit, so he was talking about himself, of course. According to Pope Francis, desborde, so going beyond the age, is proper to poetry and narrative, which contains more life than the abstract logic. Francis made this vision explicit in a talk he gave to La Civiltà Cattolica on the occasion of the publication of issue 4000 of the magazine, when he said, "That is why I like poetry so much, and when I can, I keep reading it. Poetry is full of metaphors. Understanding metaphors helps to make thinking agile, intuitive, flexible, sharp. One who has imagination does not stiffen, has a sense of humor, always enjoys the sweetness of mercy and inner freedom. He is able to open wide visions, even in narrow spaces. The thinking of the Church must recover genius." And Francis told me when I interviewed him again in 2016, the novel, literature, reads the human heart. It helps us embrace desire, splendor, and misery. It's not theory, it's helpful for preaching to know the heart. So, do you understand how much relevant is literature, poetry, narrative for his understanding? 10 years after his election to the papacy, which was on March 13, 2013, I would like to go in search of the formation of his thinking and pastoral attitude, which is marked by the dynamic of desborde, of overflowing, of going over the age. We are doing so by retracing his readings. It will be a way to understand Jorge Mario Bergoglio's pontificate from a different perspective. I will try to give some pointers to build a map, a path among the text that had shaped his way of thinking. Pope Francis has always been passionate about literature. Novels and poetry accompanied him in his formation. In a 2009 interview, when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he said that literature, from a young age, me gustaba mucho. I used to like it very much. In fact, his memories as a reader go back to the childhood, when his father read books aloud after dinner. There was no television at the time. So then, as a young Jesuit, Bergoglio taught literature at the Collegio della Immaculata Concepción, which is a Jesuit school in Santa Fe. There, I was in touch with some of his students. It's very interesting to talk to them for understanding Jorge Mario Bergoglio, because they had the Pope as a professor of literature. There's much to say about that, but there's no time here for doing it. But there, being a teacher, he developed the conviction that the creative experience is very relevant. He was 28 years old, and he had to get his students to study the classics of Spanish literature. He also began to get them to write. Eventually, he decided to ask Borges to read 2 short stories written by his students, because he knew Borges' secretary, who had been his piano teacher. But he realized that the only way for letting his students understanding literature was helping them to write poetry, to write narrative. There is no other way for understanding literature and poetry than helping them to express themselves. So he was a teacher of creative writing when he was 28. Then he asked Borges to write a preface to an anthology of those writings. So Bergoglio asked him to do it, and Borges said yes. It's also significant, very significant, that he wanted to write on June the 20, 1981, the preface to a collection of poems written by the Argentine Jesuit Osvaldo Pol, entitled De Destierros y Moradas, of Exile and Dwellings. And Francis wrote, it's a very short preface, but very dense. He wrote in this preface, "The poetic word has dwellings of flesh in the human heart, and at the same time feels the weight of wings that have not yet taken flight," which is a wonderful definition of poetry in general. It absorbs the feelings, the passions, the carnality of desire. That is why its weight is not that of wings that once they have taken flight are no longer felt. So on the contrary, the poem feels this weight because the wings still touch the heart, still touch the earth. The poetic word has dwellings of flesh in the human heart, and at the same time feels the weight of wings that have not yet taken flight. Why this poetic passion? Bergoglio knows that lack of imagination is a serious problem for faith. He wrote more or less same words that Flannery O'Connor wrote in her essays. So we lack powerful images that help us imagine the truths we believe. This is, for example, one of the reasons why he loves popular piety. It's a golden reservoir of strong images that are grafted deeply into the collective imagination of a people. It is in this sense that we should understand the appeal made by the pontiff in his preface that was read before in my book, The Divine Plot. It was a huge honor to receive a preface of Pope Francis to my book about Jesus. And I want to quote again the word at the end of this preface. I make an appeal, was an appeal, a real appeal. I make an appeal in this time of crisis of the world order, a time of war and great polarizations, the rigid paradigms of serious climate and economic challenges. And so we now need the genius of a new language, of powerful stories and images, of writers, poets, and artists capable of shouting the gospel message to the world, of making us see Jesus. I have to say that I know Martin Scorsese, and I translated this preface for him, and I sent it to him just for sharing it. He was very taken by this appeal. So just a week or 10 days afterwards, I received by mail a script of a possible film about Jesus. And as an answer, so I gave it to the Pope, and the Pope sent him a letter. So it was incredible to be in the middle of this conversation between the Pope and Martin Scorsese. Anyway, but I mean, it's interesting how, a person like Martin Scorsese, an artist like him, as he was kept by the appeal of Francis. So one of the serious problems of faith for Bergoglio is that we cannot imagine the truths we believe. We lack powerful images. So many times, in fact, as Pope, he has used and continues to use images taken from poetry, even in his most important documents. For example, in his apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, dedicated to love and family, Francis felt the need to use poetic language. And so he quoted Jorge Luis Borges, Octavio Paz, and Mario Benedetti. In another exhortation, Querida Amazonia, he quoted as many as 17 writers and poets, mostly Amazonian and popular, but also Mario Vargas Llosa and Pablo Neruda. In his papal magisterium, Francis includes always the poetic and symbolic logos as an integral part of his discourse. This is definitively significant. So the poetic logos became with him part of the ordinary magisterium, papal magisterium, magisterium of the church. But there is a particular aspect of poetic expression that Bergoglio loves. I love tragic artists, Francis told me during my interview in 2013. On a couple of occasions, I also have had the opportunity to continue the discussion with the pontiff, talking about this or that writer. One example is Dostoevsky. I knew that the great Russian novelist was among Bergoglio's most beloved writers. He repeated this several times subsequently, including during the press conference on the flight back from Bahrain. But which work in particular does he favor? The brothers Karamazov? This is what I imagine. It can be remembered that as Archbishop, on the occasion of the canonization of the Rho-Platan martyrs, the Argentinian martyrs, on May 27, 1998, when he was Archbishop, Bergoglio quoted the brothers Karamazov, saying, "Whoever does not believe in God will not believe in God's people either." This is a quotation from Dostoevsky. But when I asked him directly, "What do you like of Dostoevsky?" Pope Francis replied, "Notes from underground." Later, in my 2016 interview, he described it as a jewel. In this 1864 novel, the Russian writer describes a frustrated man who is resentful for a world that is despicable in his eyes. a man with no name and no qualities. Dostoevsky wrote, neither bad nor good, neither dishonest nor honest, neither a hero nor an insect. Though aware of what good is, he sinks deeper and deeper into a state of wickedness, amid unfulfilled desires and resolution of revenge. In his notes, soliloquy alternates with recollections of episodes in his life, laying bare his soul. I want to dwell here on one aspect of this passion for tragedy, the fact that it testifies to the complexity and contradictory nature of human experience, the contradictory nature of life. Bergoglio loves tensions. You know that? Did you realize that? So Bergoglio loves tensions. Tensions. Polar oppositions. Polar oppositions. This is a quotation from Guardini. He was a great fan of Romano Guardini, great thinker. Polar oppositions. And Guardini was a great interpreter of Dostoevsky and had a great influence on Bergoglio thought. He notes in Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky wrote that it is not necessarily 2 + 2 = 4, but could also be 2 + 2 = 5. In fact, 2 + 2 = 4, I'm quoting Dostoevsky now, 2 + 2 = 4 is no longer life, gentlemen, but the principle of death. Calculating, conceptual, and abstract thinking fails to grasp life and its real contradictions. After all, one of the cornerstones of Bergoglio's thinking is that reality always comes before the idea. This is one of his most important ideas, Paul Francis, or principle of Bergoglio's thinking. So the reality always comes before the idea. And the complexity of the polyhedron is superior to the equidistances of the sphere. He doesn't like the sphere at all. He likes the polyhedron, the multifaceted figure. Did he learn this from Dostoevsky? Certainly from Guardini, he learned that Dostoevsky described the existence of his characters by considering, I'm quoting Guardini now, the moment of fullness of existence, the undefined, the fluid element elusive to all form, the sudden and the unpredictable. This seems to me a crucial point for understanding Francis, because this infraction of the rigid logic postulated by the great Russian writer can also be seen as the basis of what Francis, in my interview, 2013 interview, he had called incomplete thinking or open-ended thinking, which has nothing rigid about it. Along these same lines is a reflection that Francis shared with the Jesuits of La Civiltà Cattolica, referring to Baudelaire, the famous French poet, an author that the young Bergoglio made his students study carefully. This I know by his students. And Pope Francis, giving this talk to La Civiltà Cattolica, my review said, I was thinking of Baudelaire's verses about Rubens, the famous painter, where he writes that la vie afflue et s'agit sans cesse, comme l'air dans le ciel et la mer dans la mer. Yes, life is fluid and steers without ceasing, as the air steers in the sky and the sea in the sea. He continued, life is not a black and white picture. Again, polar opposition. It's a color picture. It's nuanced. some light and some dark, some muted and some vivid, but still nuances prevail. So the need of, can you see, can you feel the need of incomplete thinking, nuanced thinking, the importance of complexity, the importance not to be rigid. So 2 plus 2 can make 5 instead of 4. It depends on the condition and situations of life. Somebody can be scared by this vision. Those who need something solid, secure. But this is way of understanding. And literature helped him a lot for understanding the world this way. So the need for incomplete thinking can be detected in Francis' passion for the dystopian novel Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. In this work, a charismatic world leader emerges and leads many to think that he represents the way beyond the divisions constituted, for example, by nations and religions into a broader and more inclusive humanism. Here appear then the fruits of the lie of an abstractly humanitarian ideal of so-called single thinking, or as Francis called it on his trip to Bahrain, isolated thinking. On April the 4th, 2005, as an archbishop, Bergoglio wrote on the imperialist conception of globalization. And to describe it, he said that, I'm quoting Bergoglio, Monsignor Bergoglio those times, it's conceived as a perfect clean sphere. All peoples merge into a uniformity that nullifies the tension between diversities. Benson, so again, now he's quoting Benson in 2005 for explaining his understanding of this imperialist conception of globalization. So the Benson predicted all this in his famous novel, Lord of the World. This globalization constitutes the most dangerous totalitarianism of postmodernity. So again, literature helped him to understand better globalization and all its risks. Incomplete thinking, whereby 2 plus 2 do not always make 4, is the opposite of globalized, isolated, and single thinking. Bergoglio makes his own the definition of a classical work in literature that comes from Cervantes, another great writer he liked so much. So the definition that Cervantes gave to the classical work is: children have it in their hands, young people read it, adults understand it, and old people praise it. So it's a popular work. So if a classical work is a work that is liked by children because at least the children studied it, young people read it, adults understand it, and old people praise it. The classical work is that which everyone can somehow perceive as their own, not a small group of refined connoisseurs. This let us understand a fundamental aspect of the pontiff's literary passion. The classic work in literature for Bergoglio is always popular. Classic means popular. But by popular, he also means that he has a connection with the people because it expresses their genius. This leads him in his apostolic journeys around the world to refer always to writers and poets from the places he visits, such as Miklos Radnoti in Hungary, and is going to visit Hungary in a few days, or Abai in Kazakhstan. In Colombia, it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez. In Chile, Gabriela Mistral. In Mexico, Octavio Paz. So he quoted all of them visiting those countries. This link between people and art is evident in Bergoglio's love for a work that, by his own admission, is not a masterpiece. the Argentine epic poem Martín Fierro, written by José Hernández in 1872. Bergoglio wrote an extensive reflection on this work, in which he sees, I'm going to quoting him, a narrative, a kind of staging of the drama of the constitution of a collective and inclusive sentiment. The invitation to read the national poem is meant to awaken the desire to keep alive the dream of a homeland of brothers and sisters that has guided so many men and women in this land. To keep alive the dream. This is the meaning of literature and Martín Fierro in this case. In fact, this work gives shape to the desire for a society in which everyone finds a place. The porteño trader, the coastal gaucho, the northern shepherd, the northeastern artisan, the native and the immigrant, insofar as none of them wishes to have everything for him or herself, expelling the others from the land. His accents in speaking of Martín Fierro are reminiscent of the democratic and popular romanticism of Walt Whitman, a contemporary of Hernandez, who fills the Dakota carpenter and the Californian miner, the mechanic and the bricklayer, the boatman and the shoemaker. The Argentine mosaic is no less than that of the United States because of immigration. It should not be forgotten that Bergoglio is the son of immigrants. This is why it's necessary to talk about Bergoglio's great interest in Leopoldo Marechal, a classical writer of Argentine literature, because he well expresses the value of the unity of a people on the basis of diversity and mestizaje. Francis told me about Marechal in 2013 interview. Marechal masterpiece in his first work. So he told me, we were talking during my first interview about many writers. So I asked him, which are the authors he really likes the most. And one name, which was absolutely unknown to me, was Leopoldo Marechal. And he quoted a work, which is a huge work, called Adán Buenos Aires, published in 1948, where he described the city of the brothers, Philadelphia. The work narrates a symbolic three-day voyage by the poet Adán within the geography of a metaphysical Buenos Aires, a great melting pot of races and languages, a productive and cheerful metropolis with countless immigrants, Spanish, Italians, Germans, Russians, Syro-Lebanese, and so on. The link with the writer is in particular the fascination of such an international city. It is caught in a truly Dantean, but also Dostoevskian descent into the metropolitan underground, the Inferno. No? Again, notes from underground, Inferno. It's interesting how Francis is passionate about this underground, the Inferno, the situation which are on the peripheries, but I mean, not just far away, but just in the underground of our city. So Dante influence is recognized in the seventh book of the novel entitled Viaje a la oscura ciudad de Caco del Pedia, an obvious parody of Inferno. Marechal, but also Julio Cortázar of Los Premios, the winners in English, helped Bergoglio reflect on and imagine the value of mestizaje, which he explained well to the Jesuits in his trip to the Mozambique in Africa. He said to the Jesuits, "Mixing makes you grow." it gives you new life. It develops racial mixing, change, and gives originality. The mixing of identities is what we have experienced, for example, in Latin America. There we have everything, Spanish and Indian, the missionary and the conqueror, the Spanish lineage, people's mixed heritage. Building walls means condemning yourself to death. We cannot live asphyxiated by a culture as clean and pure as an hospital operating room, aseptic and not microbial. So the love, the passion for mixture, mestizaje, is very relevant, and he learned by Leopoldo Marechal, Julio Cortázar, all these writers that really give food to his imagination. But there is also the description in Adam Buenos Aires of Philadelphia that is striking in Adam Buenos Aires. Mixture and differences composed in harmony. Harmony. This is the word Francis is using now many, many times, quoting San Basil. It's interesting. We should go deeper on that. On this couple of months, he's always talking about harmony. Harmony that comes out differences. And he said that without differences, we cannot have harmony. But homogeneity. Homogeneity. So harmony is the word of the moment for now, for Francis. I realize that. So, and Marechal writes that Philadelphia is the city of brothers among the metropolises of the world. A peaceful and happy multitude will walk its streets. As the rose, he wrote, reigns among flowers, so the city of brothers will reign among the metropolises of the world. The city is home for all who live it in their differences and intersections. How can we not see here the background for the encyclical Fratelli Tutti? City of brothers, Philadelphia, Adam Buenos Aires. It, for me, is evident after having read Adam Buenos Aires, the strong root of this encyclical in this piece of work. Therefore, art is not laboratory for experimenting with cultural and expressive dynamics. Instead, it's part of the flow of history, part of the humanity's journey on Earth. It's an advanced frontier, but not an elitist club. In this sense, it's illuminating how important the work of French writer Joseph Maleg is to Bergoglio. Francis said in my interview of 2013, I see holiness in the people of God, their daily holiness. There is a middle class of holiness that we can all be part of. The one Maleg talks about, Joseph Maleg. I never heard about Joseph Maleg, but I realized that Bergoglio is a great reader of Maleg because he quoted many times in my interview 2013. But this, the work of Maleg is on the ground, on the basis of Gaudete et Exultate, his apostolic exhortation. Born in 1876 and died in 1940, Maleg is known for his unfinished trilogy Pierre Noire, La classe moyenne de la salut. So the middle class of holiness, of salvation actually is literally. Some French critics called him the Catholic Proust. Describing what he means by the middle class of holiness, Francis manifested this link to Maleg's pages at the beginning of the Gaudete et Exultate, the apostolic exhortation on the call to holiness in the contemporary world. We are not far from the reasons why he read another great novel I Promessi Sposi. In English is translated as the betrothed, right? It just came out a new translation of this novel by Alessandro Mazzoni. And Pope Francis read I Promessi Sposi 4 times, same book 4 times. He had spoken it in my interview in 2013, saying, I had read the book The Betrothed 3 times, and I have it now on the table to read it again. And he was just became Pope just 3 months after I interviewed him. So Manzoni has given me so much. My grandmother, when I was a child, taught me by heart the beginning of this book, the branch of Lake Como, which turns south between 2 unbroken mountains of chains and so on. So he told me by heart. In the later interview, he recalled his first connection with this novel, saying, grandmother used to read us a few chapters of The Betrothed and even helped us memorize them. Recently, I picked them up again because every time you open them, you find something new in them. Often my father would recite parts of The Betrothed to us by memory and then explain them to us. One cannot help but notice how Bergoglio's passion for Manzoni's novel is the result of readings in the family context, of personal memories that have the warmth of affection of the presence of his grandmother and father. Manzoni's work is the novel of mechanical and petty business people who become instruments of divine providence. Stories and history are intertwined, traversing tribulations. On the historical level, human machinations are revealed and God's consolations are experienced. Lucia, who rightfully belongs to the middle class of holiness, is persecuted by human meanness. It's she who carries the proclamation of God's mercy. This is the profound meaning of the dramatic encounter with the captor, the unnamed, to whom the announcement of God's mercy is made. I'm quoting Manzoni now. What can I, a petty person, demand if not that you show mercy to me? God forgives many things for a work of mercy. Bergoglio is clearly impressed by works that display mercy, what we could call a literature of mercy. Dante, too, is for Bergoglio a poet of God's mercy. As he writes in his apostolic letter, Candor Lucis Aeterne, always offers the possibility of change, conversion, new self-awareness, and discovery of the path of true happiness. This is evidenced, for example, by the figure of the Emperor Trajan, a pagan but placed in Canto 20 of Paradise, or by King Manfred, excommunicated but placed by Dante in Purgatory, who thus recall his own end and the divine verdict. I'm quoting Dante now in English. But infinite goodness has such great arms that it takes what turns to it. It's a perfect summary of Francis' vision of God's mercy. For Bergoglio, the choice of Christ before the Grand Inquisitor is close of that of Lucia before the unnamed. So Dostoevsky and Manzoni. Which the unnamed, which he has well in mind, so much so that he quoted him, for example, at a key moment at the beginning of his pontificate, namely in Lampedusa, which is a little island south of Sicily, where the migrants used to arrive. The globalization of indifference makes us all unnamed, nameless, and faceless perpetrators. We note how Manzoni and Benson converge here. But what for Bergoglio is the relationship between human beings and the events of history? If I had to choose a poet in whom the pontiff finds his mentor, I would say Virgil. Virgil. In his message to educational communities on April 23rd, 2008, then Cardinal Archbishop Bergoglio of Buenos Aires has said that humanity has always conceived of life as a journey and human being as a wayfarer, homo viator in Latin. In the Bible, this is certainly the case. Just think of Abraham. But he said, when he was Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, in every human history and mythology, the fact is stressed that the person is not a quiet, sedentary being, but rather on the way. In particular, Bergoglio refers to Aeneas, who faced, I'm quoting him, faced with Troy in ruins, overcomes the temptation to stop and rebuild the city, and taking his father on his shoulders, begins to climb the mountain toward a peak that will be the foundation of Rome. The image is indelible in the pontiff's mind. It's kind of an icon. The following year, in his extensive conversation with Sergio Rubin and Francesca Ambrogetti, he said of the Virgilian hero, "Beware, Christian passions is not quietist nor passive. It's the passions of St. Paul, the one that involves carrying history on one's shoulders. It's the archetypal image of Aeneas, who, as Troy burns, lifts his father on his shoulders. Et sublato montem genitore petivi. Lifts his history on his shoulders and sets out in search of a future." So the city was destroyed, and now Aeneas took his father on his shoulder, so keeping the memory with himself for going, being vocated to found another city, which is Rome. These quotations from Virgil are an indication that this work has given the future pontiff much food for thought. Stopping is a temptation. Aeneas chooses the risk of living, of going up, and doing so carrying his elderly father on his shoulders. One can therefore seek the future only by carrying the past, history and memory on one's shoulders. But Francis went further, emphasizing the theme of memory. Forgetting the lived experience is the greatest temptation when one wants to build the future. Francis said again, "What comes to mind is another line from Virgil." Again, Virgil, Aeneid, first book. "Me minisce iuvabi." It will be good to remember the importance of memory. We need to recover our memory because memory will come to our aid. This is not humanity's first plague. The others have become mere anecdotes. He was talking about COVID in this case. He continued, "We need to remember our roots, our tradition, packed full of memories." In the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Francis is reminded of Virgil's famous verse that evokes the tears of things. The Pope was referring to the passage in the first book of Aeneid, in which Aeneas speaks to Achates of the images of war they are viewing, says, "Sunt lacrimae rerum et mentem mortalia tangunt." Tears fall for man's fate, and human suffering touches the art. One of the reasons for this suffering is certainly the Third World War in pieces. In the volume Vi chiedo in nome di Dio, I Ask You in the Name of God, edited by Hernán Reyes Alcalde, the Pope writes, "More than 2,000 years ago, the poet Virgil shaped this verse, 'War does not give salvation.' One can hardly believe that since then the world has not learned lessons from the barbarity that marks conflicts between brothers, compatriots, and countries. War is the clearest sign of inhumanity, that heartfelt cry still resound. So he's quoting Virgil for talking about war. Aeneas in the hero on the road who is aware in himself of the sense of mission. Bergoglio is very sensitive to this image, which he also finds in contemporary literature. In particular, he quotes Tolkien, who writes the future pontiff, takes up in Bilbo and Frodo the image of the person called to walk, and his heroes know and act by walking the drama that is unleashed between good and evil. The person walking denotes a dimension of hope, entering into hope. Outside of us and in us, there is something that calls us to make the journey, to go out, to walk, to carry through, to accept the bad weather, or to give up shelter. This is the journey. So in a sense, you see, Virgil, Aeneas, and the work of Tolkien are seen in the same horizon. But of course, for concluding my speech, another great homo viator is Dante, as I told you before. Bergoglio's relationship with Dante dates back to his youth. In an interview, he recalled of his father, yes, he read a lot, he had a big library, and he became a cultural person. He also recited Dante to us, Flying Heart. As a provincial of the Argentinian Jesuits, Pope Francis asked his Jesuits, confreres, to allow themselves to be founded in the Lord, to avoid being sidetracked by other ideas and doctrines that do not found anything, but rather, and here is quoting Dante, but rather undo the solid foundation of a priestly heart, doctrine that do not nourish God's faithful people, and with respect to which Dante's reflections still remain relevant. And then the Father Bergoglio quoted Canto 29 of Paradise, saying, Christ, this is Dante in English, Christ did not say to his first congregation, go preach idle nonsense to the world, but gave to them a sound foundation. And that alone resounded from their lips, so that in their warfare to ignite the faith, they used the gospel as their shield and lance. This is Dante. So Bergoglio continued, but instead of being shield and lance, the seducting and disrupting doctrines wakened the heart of God's holy faithful people, so that the ignorant flocks return from feeding fed on wind, this is Dante again, and that they fail to see their loss does not excuse them. So as you see, he used Dante for talking to the Jesuits when he was provincial. Here Dante takes issue with those preachers who fill the faithful with talk and not the gospel, contrary to what Jesus did with his disciples. In these verses of Dante's, therefore, the future pontiff saw clearly the difference between the word of sound foundation and idle nonsense. And on this difference, he based the meaning of the pastor's mission. Then he wrote, as I told you before, this letter. He wrote 3 documents on Dante. But the most important is this Candor Lucis Aeterne. And here in this letter, Bergoglio describes the mission of the poet, prophet of hope, with his verses being robust words that oppose vaniloquy. So he repeated what he said when he was a provincial of the Jesuits. So Francis is immediate in his argument and involves the Petrine ministry here. In fact, he captures the direct comparison between his predecessor Boniface VIII with Dante at the moment when in the comedy is precisely St. Peter who gives the poet the incitement to courageously live his prophetic mission. And he does so precisely in contrast to the negative testimony of the unworthy pastor of the church. After a tremendous invective against Pope Caetani, thus in fact Peter addresses the poet, "And you, my son," this is Dante in Paradise, "and you, my son, who for your mortal burden must return below, make sure they hear this from your mouth, not hiding what I do not hide." Peter, the first pontiff, Francis reminds us, invites Dante to open his mouth without hiding anything out of fear, proclaiming aloud what he did not keep hidden. Francis comments, thus Dante's prophetic mission also includes denunciation and criticism of those believers, both pontiffs and simple faithful, who betray their adherence to Christ and turn the church into an instrument for their own interests, forgetting the spirit of the Beatitudes and charity toward the little ones and the poor, and idolizing power and wealth. But Dante, while denouncing the corruption of some sector of the church, makes himself a spokesman for a profound renewal and invokes providence so that it may favor and make it possible. So in a sense, Dante is the icon of the reform of the church. Interesting, where Francis is taking his roots. So we are talking about what Bergoglio has always called paresia, the evangelic candor that speaks clearly and courageously. Francis therefore identifies in Dante the poet of paresia that is opposed to the idle nonsense, the word of evangelic reform of the church that can only be poetic. This is the meaning of what he said. The word of evangelical reform of the church can only be poetic, which means performative, creative, prophetic. So I'm going to close my conference here, but reminding you that interweaving the reading of Hernandez, Maleg, it was kind of a trip. I tried to make with you, even quoting authors which are not well known here, but we should read in order to understand Francis. So interweaving the reading of Hernandez, Maleg, Dostoevsky, Manzoni, one senses the humanity Bergoglio has in his hearts. It stands as if within a square. It starts from the straightforward folk dimension of Renzo and Lucia to the gaucha humanity of the characters in Martin Fierro's epic. It continues from la classe moyenne de la sainteté, the medium class of holiness, to the brutality of the social life of the Dostoevskian anti-hero, the man of the underground, who finds his way out in Virgil's words about Aeneas' mission, or Dante's word about the sound foundation of the gospel, or Tolkien's word about Frodo, all called to go out and walk their path. So by constructing a map of Bergoglio's reading, we can better understand his vision as pastor and perhaps even discover the roots of his way of understanding the life and the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being so passionate.
Thank you, Father Spadaro, and thank you everyone for being here today. As Professor Mursako said at the beginning, this is a celebration as well of the 25th anniversary of the department and the center. So we have prepared a little video that gives you a little bit of history of what the department does, and now it's a congratulatory message to Ines for all her work. So I also would like to recognize Michael here, who did the editing, and for his help. So I hope you enjoy it.
Department of Catholic Studies began in 2012. It offers a major in Catholic Studies with a number of offerings linking the Catholic intellectual tradition and the various specializations in the university. It also offers a minor for students that are interested.
This new Catholic Studies department has as its specific mission the reintegration of Catholic values into everything we do here at Seton Hall.
The thing that I try to develop in my current course is the idea that science and religion are compatible. They developed simultaneously over 2,000 years of human history, and it's only recently that a lot of people have decided that they are incompatible. And that, I think, is the main message that I want to get across to particularly the science majors, that science and religion are compatible with each other and in fact support each other.
Well, Catholic Studies allows you to explore many different disciplines with the one major, and I think it can make you more well-rounded, and it also goes really well with another major or minor. It can connect with English, it can connect with history, sociology, almost any other major or minor that you'd want to connect with it. So it really doesn't limit you, and it helps you to look at things so much more deeply.
I chose to double major in sociology and Catholic studies because it gives me a strong base in the liberal arts, which allows me to be effective at analyzing texts, communication with others, and then also gives me a strong base to move on to either a graduate program or a PhD program.
Both nursing and Catholic studies are service-oriented majors, and in the field of nursing we focus on the patient. The patient is our main priority. We look at the patient holistically, and they're comprised of the mind, body, and spirit, and that's where I believe Catholic Studies plays its beneficial role.
As the president of the Catholic Studies Club, some of the vision that I have is to create an atmosphere that is conducive for fellowship and discussion among students that may have an interest in Catholic Studies as a major or a minor, or to students in general, since it is a Catholic university.
I want the Department of Catholic Studies to be this place of growth for our students, to accompany our students in their journeys wherever they go, wherever their careers, lead them. I want the department to be there for our students. And also education, especially Catholic education, is something that ennobles people, makes people have big minds, but also big hearts.
At least consider a major in Catholic studies. Don't dismiss it because you're not religious. It would be a silly thing to do because you're missing out on quite a bit.
I went to Italy with Dr. Mirzaku. I got to experience a whole new world of the culture. I really enjoyed diving deeper into my faith, diving deeper into getting to know a little bit more about the saints. Because the trip was Italy in the footsteps of the saints, I was able to learn the physics behind the Eucharistic miracles, or the physics behind the building of the churches, the architecture, the history behind each place that we went to.
I want our students to go for more. And if we are thinking to make the best of our experience here at Seton Hall, Catholic Studies is the perfect double major for every major. It is the perfect minor for every other degree.
Particularly for students that are Catholic and their Catholic faith is very important to them, and they're seeking to make that integration between their faith and their field of study, their faith and maybe their future profession.
We have students from every corner of the university. Why is that? Because Catholic Studies is an interdisciplinary degree, kind of connects the dots of all the disciplines. We tailor the curricula to meet the needs of the student.
If you're a biology major, you may choose a sequence of courses in Catholic Studies that are engaging the dialogue of theology and science.
Spirituality of business, how to do business in a moral way. Spirituality of sports, which is connected with the theology of the body.
And so you can really pursue your own interest, bringing the Catholic intellectual tradition into dialogue with another field or fields.
As a physician assistant, I have to take a holistic look at my patients, not only just their medical needs, but also their emotional, spiritual, and mental needs. So being a double major in biology and Catholic studies allows me to take a look at the biological side of it, but also use my faith and my morals to help guide my patients and help treat them as a whole person rather than just a medical puzzle.
We want students to come out of Seton Hall, not just like that they can do this particular job, but that they can do it with the right values, the right ethics.
Add that to your portfolio. It will make you stand out from other applicants if you want to go to graduate school or go for a career.
And it's manageable. These young ladies on Tuesday, they have clinicals, and at 5 o'clock they have my class. And what they say is, Professor, I walk in this class and it's like refreshing. So it is definitely doable. And we are having fun together as we learn together.
Give the Catholic Studies minor or major a try. I think you're going to really love the courses, the program, the community, and you're going to grow in your faith and grow in knowledge in many fields.
In 2013, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, imparted the apostolic blessing to Seton Hall University on the occasion of the establishment of the Department of Catholic Studies. Seton Hall is the first university in the nation to claim such a rare honor. Seton Hall is also the first university in the eastern United States to create a Department of Catholic Studies, and the efforts of the department are already bearing fruit. I am Inez Murzaku. I am the Director of Catholic Studies Program and Department here at Seton Hall University. Since 2012, the program in Catholic Studies has developed into a full-fledged program. We are very proud today to say that we have 33 courses. Almost all of them are Core 3 courses, so every student in the university can take our Catholic Studies courses. They extend to the business school, to the School of Nursing, to the College of Arts and Sciences, and to every corner of this university. This is the big 25th anniversary of the Catholic Studies program. 25 years that we have a Catholic Studies program here at Seton Hall University. Now, where do we want to go 25 years from now? We want more courses that can extend, that can implement the Catholic intellectual tradition into disciplines, into various disciplines, all around campus, in every school. There are so many applications of the Catholic intellectual tradition into other disciplines. We are the oldest diocesan university in the nation. We want the community being part of this enterprise Catholic Studies program and department here at Seton Hall University. Catholic Studies is also part of the International Federation of Catholic Universities. The International Federation of Catholic Universities has its hub here at Seton Hall University, a Catholic Studies hub for the entire world, where scholars from universities that are part of the International Federation of Catholic Universities come and discern and talk about new programs, where is academia now, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge achievement of Catholic Studies. So I invite everybody in this 25th anniversary to make it more special. Come and join us for this celebration.
all of them.
So, anything?
Yeah, sure. So well, I'm trying to write a book on Pope Francis and literature. I know it was a little bit challenging because many authors I talked about are not well known by you. Maybe it was the first time you heard about Maleg or Maréchal. But I think it's very relevant to go deeper and to know those people for understanding better Pope Francis. I just try to underline the links between the Pope and the poetical discourse. Because what I realize studying and reading is how much the thinking of Pope Francis is rooted in literature and poetry. So this conference was challenging for you, for helping you to go deeper and for discovering a world which is behind the Pope Francis words. But I'm aware of that. But I think it's very relevant to go deeper. Yeah.
Chris?
Father, I was wondering if by any chance you could explain a bit more about Maleg's concept of the middle class of holiness. I wasn't able to write down any details on Maleg's specific definition of such, and also I was wondering if you could go back to the to Dante's
So the middle class of holiness means that you are not obliged to be a martyr or a special saint for being a saint. So you not to have, you are not called to be special in order to be saint. You can be saint living your ordinary life. This is the meaning. And if you read carefully Gaudete et Exultate, he talks about the saint of the next door. I don't know how to say in English. So the people who live, ordinary people, your neighbors, can be saints. So you not have to be special in order to be saint. This is kind of revolutionary. Because we always thought sanctity as something special, no? That make you special. And this is the opposite, in a sense. So reading Maleg, Pope Francis went deeper in understanding this idea. And Dante is relevant for Francis in many ways, as I told you before. The idea of being homo viator is very important because it's a person who walked, as Virgil did, and is important also because he stressed the relevance of paresia, so of being very clear, of speaking the sound foundation of the gospel and not idle nonsense. This is quotation from Dante. So this is the relevance, the basic foundation of the vision of Pope Francis. But he wrote a lot about Dante. So not just his letter, the Candor Lucis Aeterne, but also wrote in his message for the 750th anniversary of poet's birth in 2015, and in address on the occasion of the Dante year in 2020. So it's complicated. You have to. It's interesting how he learned about Dante listening his father reciting Dante by heart.
Thank you, Father.
Father, I just want to thank you so much for
No, it's.
I have my class here, and a couple of students just stopped by to say how much they get out of it. But I just appreciate so much, especially what you're saying about Dante as a poet of mercy. And I think, I think many people make the mistake when they teach it of just doing the Inferno.
Yes.
And we have it in the university course.
Yes.
One of the things that I feel really strongly about is that we have to teach the whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah.
Excerpts from the whole thing, and
Yep.
we purchase them. And, so I think that's so important because, and I just love the way you and the Holy Father emphasize that, that we said to read it for Lent, I remember. So I was just wondering, maybe you could just speak a little bit more about how mercy is enshrined sort of in the Divine Comedy.
Huh.
How it's central in devotion.
Um,
That's a big question. But
No. It's wonderful, but it's very hard in a few words, no, to see how relevant is mercy in the Divine Comedy. So you should ask you should ask an expert to go deeper down there. But what really struck me is that Dante is understood as a poet, so a prophet. So for him, poetry means prophecy. And this connection is very relevant for me. So he quoted, as I told you before, some passages talking about mercy. And but what really struck me is the idea that for him, Dante is the foundation of the reform of the church. So reading Dante, you can absorb his prophetic vision in order to reform the church. But this is very specific of Bergoglio. So it's not just the rational logic that helps you to understand a better ecclesiology, because for him, poetry and novels, narratives, contains life in a very concentrated way. So when you read literature, you are in touch with life. And so you can understand better, also because you make experiences you are not able to do living your own life. The only way for being in touch deeper with life and its metaphors and visions is to read poetry and narrative, but also the poetic language is able to speak about enables you to have a prophetic vision, because the vision you get is beyond imagination. The imagination you have living your regular life. So even talking about mercy, this is very important, because you don't have words for explaining mercy. So also because for Francis, mercy is more a time than a space. So misericordiando, it's a word which is very strange because it doesn't exist in Italian. It's a verbal way of expressing mercy. So misericordiando means that that he has a vision which is rooted in time and not in space. And not just work of mercy, but mercy extends in time. So, for example, when you think about your past and you feel the presence of God in your past life, means that you feel God as a merciful Father in the past. So you is as if the God touches your life in the past and heal the wounds you had in your past. And so the language of poetry and narratives helps you to explain this, which is not easy to tell. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Alla prossima, to the next. Thank you.